alarm on my phone to remind me to record these. So it just came up. So now I'm recording. Um, so these scores, hopefully you can see this. Can everybody see the screen, like how this is working? So 1 to 4, I want it very simple when I work with management teams to do this, so that they, one, have to choose which side of the fence they're on. So that's why they're 4 instead of 5. And they have to score the company or themselves based on very simple criteria. It's meant to be a very quick and dirty analysis, because when I have companies do this, they do it individually, and then I bring the scores back to the group and have them all look at the scores that each individual management team member fills out. And what's very interesting for me is I don't think I've done this and had an entire management team score these items in a similar way. Like I'll have the CEO score a 4 on one question and the CFO score a 1. And it's just very interesting for that team to go through these questions very quickly and figure out that most management teams don't talk to each other, or they don't talk about these things with each other and get on the same page. So what I would propose is take the file that I sent you in your email this morning and just score your company, have your team score them individually, and then get together and consolidate all of your scores into a spreadsheet and just see where you're not fully aligned within your team or within your stakeholders or within the people that you're working with. So hopefully I've monologued enough that you've gone through and read each one of the 20. And I wanted to kind of open up a discussion on and ask all of you where you see in your companies areas that may have been scored a 1 or a 2 if you were to score yourselves on this right now. And if there's anyone in the group here that can help address some of those needs in your companies. So I'd like to have this be a very interactive discussion with the team, with the group here, and see if there's any places where there are gaps in your business that you could go through and say, okay, I'm a 1 or a 2 on here, that we may be able to address, or tell us how you're addressing those. Does that make sense? So, who wants to go first? Unmute yourself. Let's see. Okay, then I'm going to call for I'm going to assign volunteers. Adele, you're still in the top left. So of these 20 questions, which are you most worried about with the new launch of App Creative? Is that what you called it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, honestly, I'm a little gun shy to volunteer or be volunteered.
Then choose someone else on the call.
No, I'm going to decline, Taylor. Thanks, though.
Okay, that's fine. Where else? Who else is seeing some gaps in projects that you're working on based on these questions, and how are you identifying them in your company?
I can take a lead here, Taylor. So I come from a very unorganized business sector. So I come from the manufacturing and of textiles and apparels. So I work with factories in Egypt, in Peru, in China, and India, and they are very, very manual. So to collaborate and then to come to a common conclusion, I think all of us have really struggled over the years, over the last few years, to come to any point. So for example, let's say market entry strategy, we don't have one. Like I would say a 1. We're still struggling. Because when you have like 4 factories in 4 different parts of the world and they all speak like 4 different languages, it's very hard to come to an automated or to a common ground where we all agree with one thing. So I would give myself a harsh 1 or 2 in most of them. And I'm being very upfront about it. Because from a factory point of view, from a business point of view, I might be a 3 or might be a 4 in a few. This is what I'm doing. But back in my factory, I know there's so much manual stuff going on right now. Like we don't have a milestone for each factory. You might have a milestone, let's say 2 years ago, but then because of COVID, things effed up. Uses of funds, pretty okay. Exit strategy, we don't have. So for example, let's say we are making clothes for Macy's, and then all of a sudden Macy's say that it's said, I don't want to work with your factory anymore, I'm moving to China. And then I have an order sitting at $225,000, and poof, I'm in debt all of a sudden. So when you have so many buyers, it's the variables are so high that there is no really exit strategy for that particular type of business. Because you can't rely all your money, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. So if one buyer leaves, you don't really have any time to find a different buyer who can give you enough capacity to fulfill, basically. That's just my verdict on my factories all across the globe.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah.
How are you, or are you, and how are you addressing some of those alignment or this lower scores in some of those alignment categories of this list?
That only happens when I'm physically in that country. So when I'm in Peru, for example, I have to sit down with my team and tell them, hey, this was not done last year for whatever reasons. I don't care. Let's focus on what needs to be done now. But it's hard when you're sitting in a different part of the world and then you have to talk to those people virtually who don't have the same experience or exposure of life like yourself. So it's easier said when I'm in that particular country, in that factory with those people. So I can tell them that, guys, we were supposed to make 100,000 pieces of t-shirts per month and we only made 80. Why didn't we do, what's the remaining gap of 20,000 pieces? Is it because of overheads or fabric or whatnot, right? So that's, I'm not able to cope with that sitting here in Toronto. I have to be in Egypt or India or China or Peru to figure that out. So now I think going ahead, I was talking to my family the other day over the weekend, and now we're going ahead and we're looking to get senior managers in place for each country. So I will just talk to one person and I will not talk to other people within, like under him. I will talk to one person, hold him responsible or hold her responsible. This is the plan for 2021. Because otherwise it's getting a bit messy when you have like business all across the globe. And you can't automate them. That's the worst. There's no way I can get a software and I can train my team to tell me that, you know what, has the fabric arrived? What is gone for production? What is art for selling? Because they don't know how to use computers right now. I still work with people in Peru, in India, and China, and they're not tech savvy at all. So we're still looking at hiring people at this stage who can be, those tech savvy people who can help us gauge what's left, what's need to be worked on, and I can just talk to one person for better alignment for future. And I'm talking about strategies here, definitely not for funds.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Taylor, is this list supposed to be for self-reflection, for due diligence? I mean, it's an extensive list of, and it's not everybody wants to exit, for example. Not everybody wants to evaluate the founder. And how do you evaluate yourself? It's a little strange. These are all reasonably sophisticated, ginormous studies. And, for most entrepreneurs, it's a matter of prioritization. And so
True.
I'm not sure how one would self-confess over regulatory issues for clothes. I mean, what are we talking? So it seems like a very long list from, a business school, maybe, of everything you should possibly consider if you want to come out and exit and be successful. But that's just not everybody's measure of success either. You know what I'm saying?
True. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it is an aggregated list, to your point, and it is a very generalized list used to do a gap analysis. So some of these things do not apply to different companies. Like you mentioned, a regulatory is not going to be an issue for many companies. But for example, like I saw Will Roberge jump on the call. He's in a company, I believe, that is regulated and would need to have his management team assess the company on that type of topic. So yeah, all of these aren't going to apply. And I use this as a tool when I'm working with companies, just to bring to the conversation a catalyst to say, these are things that you need to talk about. Whether you want to become a scalable company, a bankable, an investable, or a buyable company, like most companies have fit into one of those categories. They either want to scale and grow, they want to get some sort of loan or investment, and or they may want to exit at some point. This is kind of a high level due diligence checklist for any of those paths. And so I use this, and again, it's not meant to say, oh, we want to do an in-depth study on your distribution channel. It's meant to be more of a gut check to identify areas that a company should be looking at, because oftentimes companies are very focused on one or two or a small subset of elements that create a scalable, bankable, investable company. And if they don't have the opportunity to back up a little bit and take a step back and say, okay, am I missing anything? They can get pigeonholed into one specific area and say, all I want to do is focus on sales. But then they're not thinking about, okay, well, do I even need to think about the IP protection? Like, I look at some of the people in the group, like Spencer Lovelace, he's talked about his IP protection strategy in previous meetings. And so I know he's focused on that. Are there other elements in this list that may be helpful for him every once in a while, once a quarter, to take a step back and say, okay, let's go through this list again and just do a gut check. So this is meant to be a very high level, take 10 minutes at the most and answer these questions, just to get a sense of where there may be gaps in the company. So
Like where do you stand, basically?
yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe where could you or should you be spending an extra hour in your thinking per week on elements of your company? Did that help in terms of like setting the stage for how I use this tool?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a step before this, which is prioritization, right? So you can grade something that you've prioritized. If it's not prioritized, it might not be important, like registration, you know, for a small entrepreneurial, endeavor, you're not registering anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that this is a daunting list for, startups, and also quite intimidating, and some of it's just not relevant.
Yeah.
So,
Agreed. Totally agree that it's tough to make a tool that is relevant for every type of company in every industry, but I would say probably 80% of these would be applicable, and it's maybe a different 80% on different companies. But what I've found in going through multiple due diligence rounds, multiple funding rounds, and looking and analyzing hundreds of startups, this is a pretty good list of just high level general things that entrepreneurs should think about. So my question to everyone on the call, and I appreciate all the feedback, is I just wonder, as you're looking at these, how you're prioritizing your time on spending the time that you need in your company on some of these elements, and what's most challenging to you.
I'll jump in here. Um, I have a heavily customized scorecard similar to this that I use to evaluate all my stuff, and we check every company on a quarterly basis against it to make sure they're still matching up. That during that quarterly meeting, we look at where we're weak, and then that gets set into our objectives for the quarter, which then rolls down to inside of, we use ClickUp for all of our project and goal management now. And so that filters into ClickUp, which then has all of the specific tasks and projects and deliverables associated with making one of those things successful. And we then rate all of those based on a combination of urgency and potential impact.
Wow, that's awesome. That's
Taylor,
a lot of work. Yeah, go ahead.
now that I've had a little bit more time to kind of look at it and think about it, I think that especially in like today's age of uncertainty and VUCA, you know, volatility and all these crazy conditions that we're in, to me, like number 14, the business model is the most important. And especially when you truly are founding a startup, there's a lot of experimentation that needs to happen. And so I think that the list, the way that it is right now, is kind of overwhelming because it kind of projects that, well, if you're a startup founder, you should have all these things, or you should be working on all these things. And I think that where it's true that you want to get there at some point, but I think that you have to do a lot of iterative testing of a value proposition and a business model until you kind of get that inflection point where you know what you're selling and that it's going to be valuable to people, you know, that you're going to get traction on the market. And only after that inflection point is really hit when you feel like, hey, people are buying into this now, when I start to look at a more comprehensive list like this.
I like that. I think your assessment's right in terms of stage, Dale. And I haven't gone through this. It would be an interesting exercise. I haven't gone through this by importance of where these are at certain stages in a company. Like if you're generating 500K in revenue, you've kind of nailed that revenue model or that business model to a certain extent. And so those may be a lower priority than if you're looking for your first dollar. Am I understanding like that to be what you were kind of saying, Dale?
I think the general concept of identifying relevance according to the stage of development, yes. Number 16, business milestones for the next 2 years laid out, for example. If you're still iterating on number 14 on the business model itself, how can you possibly have milestones for the next 2 years? Like, you don't even know what you're doing for the next 2 months. Like, you need to test and retest, and then as you get closer and closer, and people are starting to pay you money, you know, then you can start to put out some milestones. But it's really difficult to know how you're going to achieve milestones and what the milestones should be if people, you know, if you're not getting traction. I feel like we're starting to get traction, but I don't feel like we've hit an inflection point yet. You know, so I would be hesitant to go through this list because I feel like even though we're getting closer and people are buying, I'm not about to lay out my next 2 years of milestones because I'm trying to get through the next 3 months.
Yeah. And again, I would say that the way that I've used this tool in the past is not as a checklist of things to do. It's more of an identifier of where time could be spent or should be spent. So I agree with you that you may score yourself a 1 on milestones, but it may not be your top priority to the point made earlier. And so just understanding that, I think, is helpful. So then you don't have to stress about it.
Yeah, Taylor, I like it. I think obviously every company is going to have a different priority list as well, right? I mean, if you're a product company, then distribution channels identified and built might be the most critical, right? I mean, I've seen amazing products that didn't have any clue how to, and no distribution strategy that never went anywhere. And then you see crappy products distributed all the time because they have that set up. So it really does. I think this is just good to kind of say where you're at and kind of say, yeah, we're a 1 on that, or no, we feel pretty good. It could obviously be better, but it just kind of, I think it's just a good self-assessment in that way. Obviously, the prioritization is up to the individual and based on their company needs. And this is by no means like some of these won't even matter at all, possibly.
Yeah, and I got called out for hiding in the background. So I work in medical devices, and we're obviously a highly regulated industry. And so, in this list and the diligence question list, almost everything applies to the businesses I'm involved in. But someone commented about regulatory issues not applying to their business, and certainly, you know, medical device regulators around the world, and even, you know, the state. You know, we're regulated as a Class C pharmacy here in Utah, right? And we make devices. We don't make any drugs, right? So there's all sorts of regulations. In fact, we have to have licenses to sell in a good portion of the states. But you know, regulatory still applies to any business that sells anything, right? I mean, if nothing else, you need a business registration, right? I mean, that's regulatory stuff, right? And you know, a sales tax license, not to mention, you know, all the other stuff that you have to deal with. So I think that probably most of these apply. I mean, certainly in my experience, these apply. Everything here applies to my businesses, but I would be careful to write them off as not applying, because there are certainly things that, and they may be things that you've already done, but they probably apply, right? I bet you the one that's most often underestimated is competition. I feel like everybody thinks that they have no competition, and there's competition for everything. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm glad you brought it in. I was talking with one of your team members yesterday about your company, and it, like, we kind of had to hit on every one of these items for me to get a good sense of how I could be helpful with the companies. Just understanding, okay, these are elements that if I wanted to introduce your company to someone, I'd want to be able to at least know most of the answers to these questions on a high level. So I think it's been a helpful tool for me to just have a place to go to and say, okay, these are things that we probably ought to be thinking about as I work with companies. I just,
I was going to say, I like the list and I like that it's daunting. We should be trying to grow, I think. And there are areas clearly as I go down and rank myself and our team. And there are areas where we can do better. Also to the point of many are trying to make is some of them may not apply to me at the very moment. So it might not be my highest priority. And I say maybe not apply. It just might not be my area of focus. To Dale's point, at some points in your business career, you're just hustling for the next deal. So setting up 2 years of Milestones is like unimaginable, because you don't even know, like he said, kind of what the next 3 months are going to look like. So totally get that. So anyway, I think it's great. I think, again, it's a good tool that we can review or reference from time to time and say, okay, are we improving in these areas or this area? Ultimately, though, we should strive to shoot for 4s on all of them. If our attempt or our desire is to get acquired, we want to be able to check all the boxes so that we look like a nice shiny object. But anyway, I like it. I think it's great. I appreciate you sharing. And then I also appreciate the one that Michael shared. That looks really cool too.
Yeah, can you see that on my screen now? Did I switch screens correctly?
Yeah.
So Michael, I just clicked on the link you put in the chat. This is awesome. In terms of dauntingness, this is maybe one step further.
Yeah, this is designed primarily as an internal tool.
Yeah.
I ask other people, you know, we give it to everyone whenever we evaluate somebody outside with it, and it normally provides insight, but it's too much for most people to go through and requires a good bit of specific expertise.
Yeah. I think it's good. I'll also do this. So I sent interesting. I'm trying to open up and share A spreadsheet. That's weird. So the spreadsheet that I forwarded in the email today, here we go. This is another list of due diligence checklists or questions. This came from one of our previous presenters, Andrew Gazdecki with MicroAcquire. And in terms of, again, daunting, this is probably the next level of dauntiness. I'm going to coin that term. But this is what he has his customers of MicroAcquire go through when they are looking to put together their due diligence room for selling their company. So I think there are just different levels. And one of the reasons that I wanted to bring these up, so you should have this in your email as well. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is just to let you know what's going on in terms of how I'm trying to craft this group with Midday Connect and what I want to do this coming year with the group. I wrote it in at least a little bit in an email, but what we're looking to do is be able to help companies become scalable, bankable, investable, or buyable with the content that we're sharing on this platform. So my intent is to have experts come in weekly and address these elements in these lists for a company so that they will then share tools and frameworks and templates that are immediately implementable in all of your companies. So example that I always go to is one of the first Midday Connects. I had the CFO of a company here in Salt Lake share his spreadsheet on how he calculates customer acquisition cost. He shared that with the group and said, here's the template, you can use it, you can tweak it, but here's a tool. So that's my intent with Midday Connect over the next year, is to be able to have experts share those types of tools that are helpful for you as business owners or managers of businesses, so that you can start checking those boxes and saying, okay, yeah, I do have a management tool. I'm using, like what Michael said, I'm using ClickUp or whatever it is to help manage your businesses more easily and get us to the growing and scalable levels of our businesses. So I wanted to share these documents with you just to give you kind of a sense of, that's kind of the curriculum, if you call it that, of what I want to put together for the Midday Connect for this coming year. If you have suggestions on either speakers or topics, I'm going to be using these kind of, I'll call them due diligence checklists or gap analysis lists, risk factor lists, but that's kind of the curriculum that I want to go through and have experts talk on small elements of each of them. So if you have questions, suggestions on topics or speakers, please send them to me. Additionally, I'm creating some partnerships, and I'm open to partnerships with the Midday Connect so that it could be valuable for everyone coming. So some of them that I'm working on are with Kiln. They want to be able to share with their tenants all of the information and education. Silicon Slopes, same thing. They're kind of going to open up and push what we're doing here out to their groups. Another group is called Omni Valley. They're out of Madison, Wisconsin. It's a group putting together a list of investors and a platform for companies to interact with investors. So just those type of partnerships. If there's any groups or partners that you would want to have in the resource list from the Midday Connect for warm introductions or anything like that, please let me know.
Hi, Happy New Year, everyone. This is Hallie. One thing I really appreciated is realizing when Will and other people were talking about commodity and product, that one of the things that is also essential to me as a doctor who's a member of a university community is also recognizing that commodities sometimes are in terms of consulting and advising, not just products and widgets. And so one of the things that I really value from this group is the ability to have an exchange of ideas that also gets into the for-profit and not-for-profit sectors, as well as applications that can have intangible benefits beyond the tangible results. So I've been working a lot in Midvale. We're putting together something with the Foundation for Granite School District in terms of criminogenic youth and risk reduction and trauma recovery. In Texas, University of Texas Medical School just approved a curriculum today on trauma recovery. And so that's where I've been really focusing and thinking towards the people I've connected with in this group in terms of ways to apply trauma recovery, medical devices, other things that fit very well into the PTSD realm. One organization I'd like to offer is colleagues at the Philanthropy Alliance Foundation, because being able to look up grants and finding ways to extend that for-profit, not-for-profit alliance is something I'd love to really explore more this year with you, Taylor, and others, because a lot of businesses are looking always for ways to test out their materials or products and services, as well as be beneficiaries of donor-advised or corporate extensions into a not-for-profit realm. And in Midvale, I now have a group of people with a 3-year history of a not-for-profit that connects with trauma recovery. And I'd love to really explore how can we continue not just the town gown, but also the profit and not-for-profit interactions that can make a difference for a lot of companies, improving actually bottom line results by having a not-for-profit designee as part of the larger picture.
Helly, I think that's awesome. Those are the type of resources also that with some of the partnerships with the Midday Connect that we're doing, we're going to have a much better management of resources and places. Like I'm going to get all of the videos up online of all the presentations, all the tools, all the resources. So I would love to have you adding those types of resources to the group, just so that it becomes a very valuable place for us to identify resources and people that we can be working with. So please look forward to some of those things, like through the LinkedIn platform, as well as a new website that we'll be launching for the Midday Connect to house all of these resources. So I really appreciate that. It looks
Sure, yeah.
like,
So I'm working now as a board member for a medical board for putting traumatology on the map of specialties. So I'd love to really see how we can pull together a lot of products and services as well as think tank issues. Thanks.
yeah, I think that's great, Hallie. I appreciate it. So I saw in the chat, Dale, you put the Eventbrite for your webinar. I will. This is an unbiased plug. Like I went to the last one and it was awesome that you put on. So I would suggest to everybody, take a look at the webinars that Dale's putting on there. They're fantastic. Are there, before we wrap up for today, are there any other kind of announcements or things that anyone wants to bring in front of the group and warn them about or announce?
So, I mean, as part of that networking as well, we're expanding the ability to 3D print parts too. So as part of if anybody wants, I mean, we're working with quite a few startup organizations, not organizations, but nonprofits that help startups to be able to provide many times them prototypes free of charge. And so if they need prototypes, then we're here to help as well.
That's awesome. Thanks, Spencer. How are you working with kind of like industrial design or other manufacturing shops to offer those services, or who is the best person that you would want to be introduced to?
So ideally well, this is a company, this is a great example. This is a company out of Beaver Phone Scope. And this is a 3D printed phone case that we're going to be releasing in Sportsman's and Cabela's. And so it's customers that already have those established sales channels. But, you know, as startups don't have those, we're more than willing to work with them and give them resources they need to get their product launched.
Okay. Awesome. anyone else have anything they want to drop with the group before we sign off? Okay, well, look for some emails from me with schedules for speakers and for the group. And then also, if you have suggestions on topics, speakers, anything that you want, I get the benefit of being able to reach out to a lot of people and ask them to engage with the group. So I'm happy to do that on your behalf if that's helpful. But just let me know, shoot me an email, and look forward to the year with all of you. So thanks so much. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week.
Happy New Year, everyone.